Welcome to part 3 of my series on Pester in action. So in this section, I'm going to walk through how I validate modules that I write. So this is how we're starting to shift into, like, the first two modules were there just to get the crash course comfort with using Pester and showing some of the example scripts I'll be using in my module. But here's where we're going to shift into the way I use Pester and kind of some more interesting things you're going to find in my script demo examples. So I'm going to just kind of make a quick comment that this is on my GitHub repo. I downloaded the whole section. We're going to deal with module 4 here, but let me get into, actually I'm going to share my screen first, don't I? Okay, so here on GitHub, we can find the downloads that are being used in this and all the videos that are part of this series. So, as I said, let's go into show a module. If you've seen my quick and dirty PowerShell modules video, or any of the other videos or times that I've talked about the way I do a module, is I really like to have a structure like this where all of my functions are in a function subfolder. And if you haven't worked with modules much before, there's basically a module manifest, which is pretty simple and can be generated on the fly with a simple command. There's a root module that usually may contain a lot more code for your module. In my case, it's just a module loader. For me, its sole purpose is to find all the functions in this folder and to load them for me. This gives me a lot of flexibility in my modules. I'm probably forgoing some more advanced features, but this works really well for lots of use cases, and so you need to know the more advanced features of modules. So in this example, we're adding a test.ps1 for our demo itself. We've already gone over the get shortcut and its tests and new shortcut and its tests in the previous video. I'm using those same files as they are in this example. So we've already done the hard work, really. We just need to put the scaffolding together to create a module, and I'll show you how my tests, my Pester tests, help with that. So I've kind of got a visual structure. I'm going to just pop open this folder real quick so that we see, same thing, right? So I got my PSD one, my PSM one for the module, my tests, functions, and the functions. All I've got are those 4 files. So now we've kind of seen what we're working with. Let's dive into the PSM one, the module file. This is my module loader, if you will. I first figure out my root path by figuring out where we're invoking this from. And then I verbose output the function import so that basically I take a list of PS1 files and I resolve their path. So I'm getting the list of all PowerShell files in the functions folder. This next line here, I'm basically excluding where not, right? And excluding all of my test cases. I do not want to import them as part of the module. I test those separately later. So then I do a for each, and I actually dot source invoke the path to the script file that we found in this online 6. I like to add verbose output where I can. So if I add this line here, my verbose will actually print out which functions I've imported when I run this. So this is the entirety of my module, my PSM1, and its purpose is to load functions. If I look at the PSD one, the module manifest, I threw this together for the purposes of the demo. It's going to look a lot more complicated than it is, because this was generated by a PowerShell command. There's going to be a lot of verbosity on here. The important ones are, for this exercise, is the root module. I need to reference the PSM1 file in here. Version, this was auto-generated for me, but it's important to note that you need a unique GUID for every module. So don't just copy this file around too much. And other details that really aren't important for the purpose of this demo. And there's a lot in here, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of lines in there, but I generally don't pay much attention to many of them until I'm doing some more specific things. So let's see where Pester can make our modules better, even before we start talking about testing our code. So I've got my help, yada yada. I have a little scaffolding to figure out where I'm at, because I can use these references in a generic way later. My describe block uses my module name as a variable, because this test is one I use for all my modules. I can actually drop this guy in everywhere. So I take a very generic approach to a lot of my tests and code, so it allows me to do that. So that's why I'm using variable names in all of these places, where if you're hand typing these out for the first time, you might be more tempted to use the actual names. So the context, the module configuration, right? So that's my first context block. It has a root module file with this name. And it tests the module folder. The module PSM1 should exist. Okay, it should have the name. It should match the name of the module. And so here's our first test that says, hey, if you're missing this file, we're going to throw an error in our Pester test. So if you're building a module and you just happen to miss or forget the PSM1, this here is actually going to tell you that's the file you're missing. Then I've validated. I've gone through this before, but basically, is it valid PowerShell? That module I just checked for a moment ago should give me no errors. So yes, it is valid PowerShell. Does it have a manifest file named whatever the module is .psd1? So the manifest file should exist. So if I forgot the manifest, this here will tell me. Now, there's a school of thought, like with desire state config, that hey, if it doesn't exist, I should probably create it. But that's a separate discussion, and really not how I want to use Pester. It's something that I should have done already, and I can take care of it on other channels. So it contains a root module path in the manifest. root module equals the module name.psm1, and I kind of test for it a second time here, just because, and I do the should contain this time, and it's actually a regex pattern. So I got to do a little escaping here, but I basically want to make sure that my module is being loaded properly in my PSD1 manifest file. And then I say, does it have a functions folder? Like if I misname that folder, typo, or just forget about it, it's going to throw an error back to me saying, hey, you forgot to create this folder, or I just can't find it. What's the deal here? And has functions in the functions folder, right? So if there's nothing in there, I'm going to throw an error back saying, hey, what's the point of a module if you have no functions? And maybe you don't have functions in there yet, and this one line fails. That might be okay, because you know why it's failing, and once you correct it, that line will turn green. So here's the point where I want to remind us that Pester, these commands, these it and these describe blocks, I'm going to go back to my original example up here, is these are just commands in PowerShell that are added. This is a function that takes a string as the first parameter and a script block as the second. This is a function, it takes a string and a script blocks. So what that means is we can mix and match logic and flow of PowerShell in and around these function calls. So I guess let me just show you my example, because what I do here is I wrap a context block inside a for each loop, okay? And in this case, I am getting all of the functions in my functions folder. Silently continue. Like I said, I don't want to throw any output here if I don't have any, because that's taking care of another test. And I want to exclude, again, my tests. Yeah, so I'm excluding tests from my list of functions, which makes sense because that's something else entirely. So I basically have a for each loop over every function it finds. In this case, I know I've got two functions in that folder, so it's going to cross this path twice. So for each current function in functions, it's going to do these things. I'm trying to say very generic, so my context says our module name, and it gets the base name of our function, so it looks clean in the output. And what we do is, well, first thing we do is check, does our function have a Pester test? So in a way, this is keeping me honest here, is it's going to check every function I make from here until eternity. And because I use this in every module, it will check every function that I create to make sure, hey, did I create my Pester test to go with that function? This is also why I like creating one function per file in my functions folder, so I know I've got my tests, and when we do the whole source code check-in, it's easy to diff and see things as small little units, and the module brings them all into my session to work with. So in this case, does that Pester test? I basically add in the tests into the name. I say it should exist. It has a Pester test. I add, it has a show help comment block. So I self-impose that my functions, my tools, should have comment blocks so that I'm being a good citizen and making sure I've got well-documented code. And my comment block, I need to have a synopsis in the current function, and it should contain an example. So my requirements is I need a synopsis and at least one example in my show help comment block for every function I create. I also impose that I assert that there's actually a function in there, but that it's an advanced function, right? So if I don't use the function keyword, something is obviously wrong. Command the binding is a keyword used that makes it the advanced function, and this helps keep me honest and making sure that that is always in place. The param block, if you have an advanced function, you always have to have a param block. I decided I may as well test for it here. And then I test, is my function valid PowerShell? And that is my standard Pester test for every module to self-validate my modules. So when we run this, I lost where I was here. Okay, so when I run this, our screen set up here so we actually see the results. So when I run this, I'm getting all these tests fly by. So at the beginning, the very, very beginning, do we have our root module? So it knows the name. So under the module configuration, it's like, hey, I got the root module, the PowerShell is valid, it has a manifest, it contains a root path, it has functions, it has a function folder, and there's functions in there. So, and then we scroll down, we see it got both of the functions in their own context. And I did the get shortcut first, and it ran through all of these things. Pester test, help comments, advanced function, is valid PowerShell. And then it goes down to new shortcut. It says, hey, the Pester test, show help, da, 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 right? And the cool thing is, when I now, if I actually do an invoke Pester on this folder for that demo, it's not only going to run my demo Pester test, but also run the Pester test for every function. So now we're up to 27 tests. They're very thoroughly making sure that things are done correctly here. So you can see where my describe shifts from my get shortcut, space of features, then it describes a new shortcut, right? And then you can see it shift into describing the module. So that's how I know am I shifting between different sets of tests, my test files. And that for each is such a powerful thing to mix in with a Pester test, and just validating the structure and pieces of my module are there is very, very handy. Now I keep, lost my path here again. Okay. I mean, I keep a pretty simple pattern to my modules right now so that I don't have to think about them very much, and they're very generic so that my tests can be generic, and it helps me validate these things out. And as I find bugs or run into issues, you know, I'll backport in there and create a test for it. But my module test, my demo test here, is purely just making sure my stuff is going to work. And I can have a lot more confidence that I've built my module correctly. And my module is not loading. Well, I'm going to know before I try to load it that something's not right because I've got these tests covering all of those cases. You know, things from folders in the wrong depth, or files in the wrong place, or names being wrong. This test captures that. And this is a test you can just drop into, if you use the same structure as myself, you can just drop and use in your tests, in your modules. I'm going to break this video right here because in the next section, I'm going to walk through building a module on the fly using this set of Pester tests to kind of guide me to find errors and fix them. So let's come back to that video, and I think this is a great breaking point for this one.